Due to their failure to grow as anticipated, economists had all but given up on the developing world by the early 1990s. Overall, there was a significant disparity between advanced economies and the rest. Even while some particular nations, such as South Korea or Singapore, occasionally moved up the income scale, then the scene was altered. The gap between the rich and the rest rapidly narrowed in the late 1990s as global trade grew rapidly. Poverty fell. Less than 10% of individuals lived on less than $1.90 per day at purchasing power parity in 2022, down from 36% in 1990. Additionally, the percentage of Africans living in extreme poverty dropped from 53% to 35%. How do economies in Africa fare? This matrix divides nations into two categories: is strong growth 5% or more, and weak growth less than 5%. In order to provide an answer to this query, the economies of the nations are further separated into three subcategories within each growth category: non-resource intensive nations, oil exporters, and other resource-intensive nations. 18 of the 41 countries have attained a growth rate of 5% or more, according to the table, which is based on growth data from 2013 to 2023. Why, therefore, are some African nations becoming better while others are not? Economic growth and commodities. Commodities have influenced Africa's economic development for many years. Growth was favorable, while commodity prices were high. The continent's economy suffered when prices fell. Despite having 2/3 of the world's diamonds, 1/10 of its oil, and 1/3 of its mineral reserves, Africa remains the world's poorest continent. Research from McKinsey & Company, however, indicates that Africa is surpassing many predictions and turning its diversity into possibilities. Similar countries. The first lesson is from Rwanda and Burundi, which emphasizes the significance of just having a functioning state. Both nations are inhabited, small, and landlocked. Both countries have seen genocides committed by their Hutu majorities against their Tutsi minorities since achieving independence. Their government is one important area where the two diverge. While Burundi had numerous coup attempts and widespread political unrest, Rwanda has a functioning government and minimal corruption, even though neither nation is democratic. Rwanda is ranked 12th and Burundi 43rd on the Ibrahim Index of African Governance, which considers several factors such as infrastructure, sanitation, and the rule of law. Economic policies are important. The second is the importance of economic policies. When Kenya and Tanzania gained independence in the early 1960s, their economies were comparable. Both were reliant on agriculture, and their per capita incomes were about equal. To govern authoritarian one-party nations, both first repressed democracy. However, their economic models differed greatly. While Kenya adopted free markets, which attracted investment and enacted several regulatory reforms to facilitate both domestic and foreign investments, including the creation of an export processing zone, Tanzania nationalized large corporations and compelled people to work on collective farms under the guise of African socialism. Kenyans are now 80% richer than Tanzanians as a result. Botswana and Zimbabwe support this even more. The political leaders of both nations have somewhat distinct temperaments. Zimbabwe was wealthier than Botswana during the beginning of the 1980s, but Robert Mugabe, Zimbabwe's second president, ruined the country's economy with his autocratic leadership, reckless currency printing, and agricultural theft for his friends. The most successful economy in Africa. Let's examine the economy of Mauritius, which is the most prosperous in Africa. With one of the highest GDP per capita and HDI scores, it is a perfect illustration of how nations, with strong institutions and sensible policies, may start a positive growth cycle. However, the island economy has maintained a high and steady economic development rate, averaging 5% yearly between 1980 and 2000, in addition to preserving social cohesion and national stability. Given its size and abundance of natural resources, Madagascar, Mauritius' largest neighbour, appears to be well positioned for possible success. But that wasn't the case. Corruption and poor management are the primary issues facing the African economy. Power corrupts people. issues. This is also true in resource-rich economies, such as Nigeria's, Africa's largest economy, where easy access to oil profits encourages unethical behavior. Nigeria is ranked 150th out of 180 nations in the Transparency International Corruption Perception Index. Instead of hiring the top applicants, public organizations frequently choose to hire the boss's friends and relatives. As a result, such institutions, whether they be educational or transportation, become less effective and provide less of what they are intended to. Furthermore, nations with high levels of corruption draw less outside investment. Their tax bases are lower and their prices are greater. South Africa's tax-to-GDP ratio is around 25%, while Nigeria's is barely under 8%. The development of Africa. Without question, Africa is expanding, and domestic investment and consumption are already fueling this growth. That dynamic would be strengthened by the growth of regional trade, particularly in industry. Only 19% of African nations' exports to the rest of the world are manufactured commodities, while 43% of their trade with one another is. Businesses must export internationally in order to reach wider markets. They become more productive as they adjust to the global competition. Nigeria is progressively becoming less dependent on oil exports. Rwanda is developing into a convention destination that draws high-end travelers and prosperous business services companies. Ethiopia and Lesotho are constructing industries and a manufacturing hub in the Asian manner. Some analysts contend that nations hoping to duplicate Asia's economic miracle are facing limited opportunities due to automation, competition, and changing demand. But a factory job isn't necessary for everyone. Many Africans will transition from living next to a wildlife reserve to guiding visitors around one, or from subsistence farming to commercial farming. Difficulties and hope. Due to the division of Africa by colonial powers, the continent's population was less than 100 million, or around 1/3 of Europe's total population at the time. Currently, there are nearly twice as many Africans as Europeans. This fast population expansion is viewed by some observers as a formula for catastrophe. Approximately 1/3 of children still suffer from malnutrition, even though the poverty rate is declining. Approximately 1 million Africans join the workforce each month. Many of them lack the necessary knowledge and abilities. Over 1/3 of youngsters in Africa do not complete secondary school. Madagascar and Mozambique have rates that are higher than 50%. In the long term, there is cause for optimism due to the main trends that are occurring, including rapid urbanization, rising migration and remittances, an increase in the proportion of children enrolled in school, and the hundreds of thousands of students attending institutions overseas. Even though not every country participates in this positive cycle, those that do see a marked difference. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more content like this. See you in the next one.